Today's webinar is titled Leveraging Pre-Course Assessments, presented by David Quinn. I'm going to pass it over now to our presenter. Dave, thank you so much for being here today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Rio. Good afternoon to some of you, and I hear that we're quite spread out throughout the states. So good morning to everybody else. If you want to warm up your chat option, feel free to put your state in the chat for everyone to see. As Rio said, my name's David Quinn. I'm born and raised in Western Michigan. My wife got into healthcare at the same time as me. And she's been a nurse for 30 plus years and is currently a manager at Fresenius in Ludington, Michigan. We have 4 boys together. 2 of them are utility linemen. One of them is going to school this fall for industrial maintenance. And our baby was just accepted into nursing school this fall. And just kind of a proud daddy moment is he's currently in Colorado for the NCAA Division II track finals. And again, a little bit of a bragging on me. As soon as this webinar is done, I'm breaking free and beginning the trip to Pueblo, Colorado, I believe. Never been to Colorado to watch him compete. I've been a wrestling coach for 22 or so years with my kids growing up, and I believe that being a coach, if you will, has some application in today's lecture. My professional background, I've had just over 30 years of experience as a paramedic, as well as an instructor coordinator in Michigan. All of my road experience has been rural EMS. And my teaching experience has mostly been in initial education, a couple EMR programs, many high school EMT classes, one and only a EMT course, and then several paramedic courses, most of which were taught at our local community college. Why this topic? Over the years, I've done some things well, and I would have to say that I've had a successful career in education. But if I'm being honest, as I look back, there's something I completely messed up, completely let my students down. And I think I can literally think of several students who struggled through the didactic portion of class, but thrived in the lab, but unfortunately ended up failing out of the class, or maybe passed barely, but then couldn't get past the National Registry written test. And that's why I chose this topic. And as you can see from the title, it's utilizing pre-course assessments, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. With all of my years of experience, I've never ever, not even once, used a pre-course assessment to evaluate my students and help prepare them to be successful. I'm sure the college did entry assessments, and the high school students may or may not have had IEPs, but none of the information was shared with me. And now that I've been exposed to pre-course assessments, I believe they are a powerful tool and that all instructors should use, or at least consider using them. They should be part of a recipe for success for your students. So here we go. I'll try and watch the chat and answer the questions as we go, but to be honest, I'm not really good at that. And so just know we'll have time at the end for questions and answers, anything you might have. I told you what I used to do, now for what I currently do. I'm currently a medical educator, trainer for Platinum Education Group. It's this job where I was first exposed to these specific assessments I'm going to talk to you about today. I may reference EMS testing from the perspective of it's what I know, but I will also give other options you could choose from. What do I want you to take away from today? First and foremost, the importance of collecting and then utilizing the information obtained from the assessments. Strategies to help students who find a deficiency or a weak area. and suggestions on how to set up your classroom or hybrid environment to set the students up for success. And then lastly, best practices in using the assessments. Pre-course assessments have more than one use. Some larger programs utilize them more as a selection process, and that's fine. Maybe you have 100 applicants and only can accept 30 students into your course. Using assessments as part of that selection process seems like a great idea, but I've never been in a situation like that. My community college struggled to fill a class. I was fortunate if we ever hit 15 students. So today I'm talking from the perspective of they are your students. You're utilizing the information to increase the student's likelihood of success. I'm taking the liberty to break the assessments into two categories. The first group, identify problems, weaknesses, deficiencies, if you will, and those would be, as you see, math, reading, and test anxiety. And the second set are more of getting to know your students, their character, motivation, entry exams, as well as their learning preferences. What's the process, you ask? Well, for math, it's first step, you need to do an assessment of some kind. Second step, evaluate those results and determine if they meet the requirements for your course. Third, what are you going to do about it? If you find a deficiency, you need to develop a plan for improvement. And lastly, reevaluate and then, if necessary, repeat the process. Assessing math, is it necessary? It's been quite a controversial question. As we travel the country doing workshops, this is by far the hot topic. Does an EMR need to know math? How about an EMT, an AEMT, paramedic? So some of those, probably no question, we need to know math. Some of them, there's probably a debate amongst us. In Michigan, ALS providers are required to do a cross-check prior to giving medication. ALS crew's minimum staffing is medic basic. So I'd say math is needed at a minimum at the EMT level and above. But whether we agree, disagree, if you are on the boat of you agree, what level do they need it? And do they need the metric system? Can they change pounds to kilograms? Basic functions, can they add, subtract, multiply, and divide? How about advanced functions? Can they work with formulas and equations, unit calculations, or conversions? So it's important to decide what to assess, and obviously that's probably different for each of the provider levels. And if they fall below your benchmark, what would you do? Consider using worksheets in a specific area that they need to improve in. I just simply Googled how to improve fill in the blank math scores, and tons of stuff comes up. Just a helpful hint in researching this information. Determine what is acceptable before you see your student results. You don't want to be swayed based on what you see. So figure out what you're going to set your benchmark at prior to administering to your students. And then once you've done whatever you needed, the worksheets, whatever helpful hints you had for your students, reassess them. See if they meet the benchmark now. Here's just an example of a results page from EMS testing. It happens to be the assessment that I did when I started. You can see it breaks down the results into categories for the students/instructors to identify both strengths and weaknesses. In this example, it was 120 questions in multiple different areas. And you can see you're able to identify my strengths and my weaknesses to form a plan for improvement. You could certainly create your own assessment to test on exactly what you feel they needed to know and make it more provider level specific. Let's look at this slide together. Just kind of read it. 20% of US adults read at or below a 5th grade reading level. Average reading level in the US for adults is approximately the 7th to 8th grade reading level. You can see these stats are from 2005. So I figured, oh, those are awful. I should look to see if there's something more current. So as I looked for a more recent study, I see the numbers from a Wiley study from 2012 that showed the exact same statistics. So at least in 2012, our numbers were still, as you see on the slide. The Americans for that US adults was from age 16 to 65. And you can kind of extrapolate from that data that 50% of US adults read at the 7th grade level and below. And 50% of adults read at the 8th grade level and above. Why is this important? Well, it used to be published once upon a time on the National Register website what reading level their exams were at. And it's no longer there, but just to use that information, previous information, the EMR written test was written at approximately the 5th to 6th grade reading level. EMT was approximately 8th grade. AEMT and paramedic, approximately 10th grade reading level. So if you look at the slide and apply that to that information, now it should stand out exactly why this information is important. 50% of Americans can't read a book at the 8th grade reading level. This information certainly could be used when you're selecting a textbook for your program. So what should we do for reading? First step, we need to do an assessment of some kind. Evaluate the results, determine what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Maybe you find that the student has an IEP or an individualized education program, a laid out special approach for the student specific needs. Maybe it's extra time while taking a test, just as an example. A fourth step, what are we going to do about it? We need to produce a plan for improvement. And fifth step, reevaluate, and then, if necessary, repeat the process. Here you can see the Flesch-Kincaid grade level. Kind of the theory behind it is reading level has a direct correlation with writing. A person writes at the level they are comfortable reading at. So give them an assignment to write about, something they like, or maybe why they want to be an EMT, or what profession or what course you're teaching. Maybe a paragraph, maybe like 125 words for an example. The example on the left shows how the Flesch-Kincaid grade level works. Total number of words divided by total number of sentences, total number of syllables by total number of words, and magically it spits out a grade level. The example on the right is just simply using Microsoft Word. Have them follow that same thing. Write you a paragraph using so many words. Use the editor option available in Microsoft Word. And you can see second from the bottom there, that magically spits out the Flesch-Kincaid grade level as well. I also simply Googled reading level assessment, and here's a few of what I found. Savvy Learning free assessment, Macmillan reading level test, Oxford Online English free level test. Many different ways, just simply pick one. Prior to administering the test, decide what is your course requirements or benchmark. In EMT class, having a student with a reading level at the 5th grade level, is that acceptable? How about an AEMT or paramedic student with the same 5th grade reading level? Is that acceptable? And if this wasn't a tough enough decision to begin with, remember that most of the assessment states the results are plus or minus 1 reading level. And if that isn't bad enough, Remember that students are able to read plus or minus 2 grade levels. More than 2 levels above, they're going to struggle and they will not comprehend well. More than 2 below their reading level, they're going to read too quickly and likely miss things. So if the results are unacceptable, what are you going to do about it? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's commercial programs such as Hooked on Phonics, Learn to Read Guaranteed, Sylvan Learning Center, Reading A to Z program, Imagine Learning, readworks.org, 1 Minute Read application, just to name a few. Or possibly school resources. Maybe the library has something that could help us, a student in this situation. Or we have a self-help strategy I want to kind of focus on today. Send the student to a library or a bookstore, somewhere where they can get help identifying a book or a magazine's reading level. Have them check out a book or a magazine 1 grade level above their current reading level. Have them commit to reading that book and writing down any words they don't know. Then look them up and commit to using the words in everyday life. So far, we have assessed the student. We've identified a problem. We've produced a plan. Now we must retest and repeat the process as necessary. The average time needed to improve 1 grade level. Some would think 1 grade level probably takes a year, but it can be as fast as 2 weeks, believe it or not, depending on how dedicated the student is in the process. When it comes time to reevaluate, if you had them write a paragraph on something, have them write about something else, or maybe consider a book report on what they read. You can artificially improve the results by not using periods. So consider adding periods where appropriate, and then see the results for a more accurate assessment. Remember, the length of the sentence is one of the things used to determine the reading level in the Flesch-Kincaid grade level system. So a paragraph that is 1 long run-on sentence is certainly going to sway the results. This is my reading results page from EMS testing. This is a good example that knowing how they are calculated can skew the results. I knew how the Flesch-Kincaid system worked, and I purposefully used bigger words, longer sentences, and you certainly the same could happen with your students. So make sure the students don't know how the system works prior to giving them the assignment. So hopefully you get an accurate assessment. I guarantee you, I don't read at the 6th grade reading level. It may be you identify an issue that requires you to consider against an educational advice letter. Maybe you identify a significant hurdle and you encourage them not to start your course and first work on the problem. Maybe they set this course out, address the issue that was identified, and be ready to go next time around. Remind them the course moves on at a normal pace, with or without them. All this extra work that we've discussed is above and beyond the already busy schedule of the class. So ultimately, it's up to the student. You're just helping identify obstacles that they will need to overcome to be successful. And you've given them a heads up or an early look while there's still time for them to decide to start or not start the course. As I look back, I feel that the reading level assessment is where the students that struggled in my programs were likely lacking. And I could have identified that early and helped them do something about it. So don't be me. My experience is most students will tell you they have test anxiety, but do they? You simply stand in front of your class and ask the question, see how they respond. All joking aside, the #1 way to avoid excessive test anxiety is to know the material. I say excessive because some nerves is normal. I know people who have true anxiety. They break out into cold sweats, physically sick when they hear that they must take a protocol test, as an example. That same person is probably the best medic I've ever come across in my career. I'd definitely let him, he'd be my first pick to take care of my family in their time of need. Prior to taking our last protocol test, I just simply sat down with him to build his confidence. We talked about test taking strategies, using your first choice and not second guessing your answers, along with other multiple choice test taking strategies. He actually did better on the test than I did, and I like taking tests. Help them to study efficiently, finding help videos such as how to study, how to take a test, how to read a textbook. There's definitely better ways of studying, strategies, taking a multiple choice test. And oh man, do any of the students nowadays know how to read a textbook? I don't think this information is taught in a typical high school classroom. So we, as instructors, should help get these things figured out. All of these tests I just mentioned here are available through EMS testing. Encourage them to study early and in similar places. It's much better to study a little bit over time versus cramming all at once or even the night before. Similar places can help you recall the information at the time of a test. Taking short breaks every 1 to 2 hours can help take your mind off the stress of studying. After 2 hours, the average student becomes ineffective, or their studying becomes ineffective. Come up with a pre-test routine. Learn what works best for you and then stick with the script. This will help your mind believe you're ready. You must believe you are ready and will do well, just like sports. Most athletes do the same warm-up prior to every game or competition. I found an interesting study that showed that if a student believes a significant portion of their exam score was already accounted for by a class activity, they will experience less stress during the exam and actually do better, likely because the stress was less while taking the exam. If I was an active instructor in the classroom, I would definitely be putting that study in action to see if it really works. Maybe as an instructor, we should look at adjusting our grade book to help reduce some of the stress. Maybe lowering the weight of quizzes, tests, and exams and placing a higher emphasis on effective evaluations or participation. Talking to the teacher, verify and make sure you know what's going to be on the test, chapters, topics, etc. The type of questions, is it multiple choice or fill in the blank, matching essay? Make sure you're exposing your students to the type of questions they're going to see on their state or national test. What type of test is it? Is it a linear test or is it adaptive? Sitting for the national registry or state test shouldn't be the first time a student is taking an adaptive test. Adaptive testing is very stressful, and we should have our students practice taking them throughout the course to increase their chance of being successful. Maybe even consider making adaptive tests mandatory so everyone does them. Let the teacher know that they have anxiety. They may have suggestions that could help. Relaxation techniques right before, during, deep breathing, focusing on your breathing for 2 to 3 minutes is shown to help reduce anxiety. Closing your eyes and imagining a positive outcome helps. What to eat and drink. Don't forget your brain needs fuel to perform at its best. Plenty of water, avoiding sugary drinks and foods that could cause your blood sugar to peak and then drop. Energy drinks with caution as they may increase anxiety. Exercise. Aerobic exercise can help relieve tension and possibly sleep better due to being fatigued. Sleep has directly correlated to academic performance. A good night's sleep will be more helpful than cramming all night. Short little story about my son again. He's trying to get accepted into the nursing program. Finals are coming up, and one of his classes, his grades are right on the cusp of it being high enough to be accepted or be high enough to get into the nursing program. So of course, his mother's on the horn with him, making sure he's studying. And in true teenager form, he says, "Yes, Mom, I'm going to practice, and then I'm going to study all night." Well, he thinks he's got things figured out, and we both look at each other and say, well, that seems like a recipe for disaster. Thankfully, he made it. So maybe he knows more than we think. Learning disabilities, don't ignore them. Anxiety may improve by addressing an underlying condition that interferes with the ability to learn, focus, or concentrate. My friend that I mentioned, who stresses that true test anxiety, he has a learning disability, dyslexia, and he's just learned to overcome and deal with it. He never reached out and got help for it. Having an athlete's mindset, you must believe in yourself. You've been learning, preparing for the day or test. I tell my athletes, if you think you're going to win, you will. If you think you're going to lose, you will. Winning or passing in this case starts with believing in yourself. Being an instructor is very similar to being a coach. We both teach a given skill or topic. The only difference is one of us do it in the classroom and the other does it on the mat, gym, or field. Well, I'd say coaches focus more on the mindset of the athlete, and instructors could benefit by adding it to the classroom also. Oops, sorry. Here's just results from EMS testing. I was asked 23 questions about how you feel when you take a test. If the system identifies you have true test anxiety, it automatically opens up a video on how to overcome test anxiety. So that's sweet, as it automatically takes care of what you need. Professional characteristics assessment. No one has perfect character. We all have room to grow, and the growth in character is a lifelong pursuit. The key to a character assessment is to be honest with yourself. If you're not willing to look at yourself honestly, a character assessment is a waste of time. So this assessment especially, you will need to get buy-in from the students on its value. Just as an example, our character assessment testing, EMS testing, has 2 sections, total 22 questions total. The first section has 11 questions, and it asks that you assign how someone who knows you very well would rate you on the characteristics you see on the slide, ranging from 1, very rarely, 2, seldom, 3, frequently, and 4, consistently. And then also you have to give an example of a situation that would support why you selected the score that you did. In the second section, 11 questions, you're asked to read through a situation and how would you handle the situation. So basically, situational response. What do we see popping up in the news all too often these days is EMS providers who have lack of professional character. So this makes me think that this assessment is even more relevant today than ever before. This is just a picture of the character results. 22 questions, and you can just see what the questions were, what they were ranked, and an example within. We all know that motivated students are engaged and therefore learn better. So we should identify this information and use it against them. I know that kind of sounds bad, but it's not a bad thing. Basically, you're just finding what is meaningful to each of the students and using the information to get them engaged or motivated. I see instructors come to our booths at the conferences and grabbing swag. Often they mention that they give the swag to their students during class as a prize. This is a great idea and shows me that people are using motivation in their classroom, which is great. Keep it up. Intrinsic motivators. Maybe they've seen a loved one helped by EMS, so now they want to pay it forward. Social relationships, maybe they're joining or wanting to be in your class just for new friends. Maybe it's escape the boredom of their home life, external stimulation. Maybe it's a cognitive interest. They learn for the sake of learning, seek knowledge for its own sake, satisfy a curious mind. Extrinsic motivators: must successfully complete or you lose your job. That'll get you motivated. Maybe it's a show me the money. They're after a pay increase. That's why they're there. Maybe it's going to give them more time off, a better schedule, better bid opportunities. Maybe it's a competition that motivates them. Competition is what does it for me. But when I look up the definition, it makes me feel kind of bad. The definition that popped up for me was the satisfaction in surpassing the accomplishments of another person. Well, that's not really how I feel. But I think in sports related, I'm always looking to win, improve, do better. It's more against myself than others. I personally could be falling asleep in my chair and faintly hear someone mention the word competition, and I'm immediately awake and wanting to be part of it. And not only be part of it, but I want to win. So being able to identify something like that, what gets your students engaged, is critical. And not only identify it, but use it against them. Here again, our motivation within EMS testing asks, I believe, 36 questions. You answer them and it spits out the results, as you can see here, and kind of ranks what motivates the student from highest to lowest. And then you can read the results if you just hover over, oops, wrong one. So yeah, the results page there. Entry exams. These tests should be used to evaluate what knowledge the students have coming into your course. Maybe they're fresh out of a class and have retained the knowledge. Maybe they have been a provider for a while and lost some of that book knowledge. Maybe they completed a course and haven't secured a job and lost much of the knowledge they once had. Maybe they come from another state and have different training or experiences than your state. Either way, this is all good information for you to discover, identify early while you have time to adjust. Consider giving previous certification level final exams, or for EMR, maybe a high school science test. For paramedic students, it could be an EMT final, or maybe even an AEMT final, depending on how the students, what their background is. If identified as strengths, maybe cover the topics with a higher Bloom level to build upon their knowledge. Don't bore them with knowledge they already have. Cover the material at the higher Bloom to challenge them. Or if you identify a weakness, maybe you need to back up and cover things that they are weak in at a lower Bloom level to hopefully help them be more successful. Either way, taking the results and leveraging them for their success. Audio learners, I hear you. They would prefer to listen to a lecture than reading a book or an assignment. They like to listen to recordings and maybe even talking to themselves. Visual learners, I see what you are saying, understand or remember things by sight. They like to see what they are learning. Kinesthetic, that feels right. Someone that needs to be actively engaged in their learning. They're tactile learners who use movement, testing, trial and error to recall information. Remember, they're not absolute. People learn in a variety of ways. That's why they're known as learning preferences instead of learning styles. Independent learners prefer working by themselves, work best in quiet and undisturbed areas. Social learners enjoy working with others, possibly group projects, study groups, discussion forums. A structured learner needs to stick with a script. If class starts at 8, it needs to start at 8, not early or late. Same with class ending. If it ends at 5, it needs to end right at 5, not early, not late. Flexible learners are laid back, go with the flow, nothing stresses them out. Analytical learners, they process information logically, sequentially, in parts. They see the trees before they see the forest. They're primarily interested in acquiring new and accurate facts that lead to their understanding of concepts and processes. Global learners need the big picture before they see the parts. Typically, they're creative, artistic, and intuitive. Experiential learners, they see the forest and then say, hey, look, there's trees. They tend to learn in large jumps, absorbing material almost randomly without seeing connections, and then suddenly they get it. They do not necessarily need all of the individual steps laid out in order to get a concept. Learning style results, 25 questions, how to ask simple questions on how you prefer to do things, and then spits out the results you see here. And this is the results page where you can actually hover over the results, the word, the different learning style, and it'll give you a brief description of what it means. Setting up your classroom. Audio and visual learners should be up front, putting the kinesthetic learners in the back and letting them be up and moving around, but have them in the back so they're not in front of the audio and visual learners being a distraction. To the extent possible, maintain separation for independent and social learners. Use interactive teaching methods. Hybrid at-home environments. Avoid using canned presentations. Consider recording live lectures. This allows the visual learners to watch it again and audio learners to listen again. Give suggestions to the students on how to set up their at-home study environments for the hybrid programs. Visual learners should set up space to avoid visual distractions. And you guessed it, audio learners should set up their space to avoid auditory distractions. Kinesthetic learners should be encouraged to have busy hands while they're learning, maybe Play-Doh or fidgets or doodling. And this is kind of going in the weeds a little bit, but since we're talking about learning preferences, I thought a quick refresher on the learning pyramid would be appropriate. Remember lectures. Lecturing in a classroom, student taking notes, they likely will only retain 5% of what they learn. Remembering audio learners will definitely do better than that. Simply reading a textbook, they're going to be able to maintain or remember about 10% of what they read. And of course, visual learners will do better. Audio visual, videos, pictures, graphs, sounds, PowerPoint presentation, typically gets us up to about 20%, so still not really good. Demonstrations, activities or projects, skills likely, we're up to 30%. Notice that all of these are passive teaching methods up on the top of the pyramid, all the way down to demonstration. Participating, active teaching methods are at the base of the triangle and drastically increase a student's retention. Discussion, full class discussion, or maybe smaller groups, learning collaboratively, or they're processing the information through conversation, they're getting to about 50%. So now we're getting pretty decent. Practicing hands-on, like repeating a skill multiple times, we're up to 75%. Teaching peers require the students to develop expertise in a topic so they can relay critical details clearly and accurately. Now they're understanding the why, not just the how. That gets them to 90%. That's awesome. Maybe this learning pyramid is spot on, maybe not. I think the takeaway is students learn better when they're participating or an active teaching method is used. And if our goal is student success, we as educators should consider using this information when creating our lesson plans and incorporate the idea as much as possible. How to implement. My recommendations. Remember, I already told you that I've never given any of these to my students. So to be able to give you the best practice advice, I've asked around. I've, if you will, phoned a friend or two to be able to share what they have seen that works best. Here's the recommendations I've heard. The reading assessment should be given prior to class starting, so any deficiencies can be addressed prior to class. The learning preference assessment should also be given prior to class, so you could use the information to set up a seating chart if we're talking a classroom scenario. And all of the others can be given as soon as possible at the start of a program. I wouldn't recommend a time limit for the assessments, as the students should be encouraged to take their time. It is critical to get buy-in from the students on what the data is used for, which is providing helpful information to both them and the instructor that can be leveraged for their success. Taking all of the assessments at once would be quite overwhelming. I'd suggest splitting them up as to not overwhelm them simply by the number of questions being answered or a sore butt. So no more than 2 hours of testing at a time. Depending on which assessment you do and how long that specific assessment is, that might also help you decide which ones and when to administer them. And I'm sure there are plenty more assessments that could be given and help your students succeed as well. The 7 we discussed today are just the ones I've been exposed to and highly recommend everyone implement into their program. Sometimes baby steps are the best way to incorporate a new idea. Don't be overwhelmed and end up not doing any. It's far better to pick one or maybe a few and start with them and slowly incorporate more of them as you can. Maybe start with the one you feel will have the most impact on your students. I know if I could only choose one, it would be the reading level. As I look back and think about the students who struggled in my program, I think it was likely a low reading level that played a significant role in them struggling. And as I know now, it could have been identified early and maybe have changed their outcome. And remember, once you decide which assessments you're going to do, make sure to select the assessment you're going to use, whether you create your own, a commercial product, or maybe find a vendor that has them all available for you. Evaluate those results. And remember, pro tip was set your benchmark prior to seeing the student results. If a weakness is identified, form a plan for improvement, and then reevaluate. And if necessary, repeat the process. Don't be another me. Assess your students early and leverage it for their success. I thank you all for attending today's training webinar, and hopefully everybody was able to pull something new that you can use in your programs to help your students succeed. Does anyone have any questions, which I did not even look at the chat box besides some state information, so I'll look at that now. Wow, lots of states. Cayman Islands, ooh. Garden of Gods in Colorado, all right. Oh, I see something here. We have students who are employed by a local fire department and enroll in the EMT class because it's a requirement, but have no real desire to provide pre-hospital care. What do you recommend to help motivate these students? That is a great question. I guess My recommendation would be to have them take these assessments or the motivation assessment and see what it is that gets them going. And then you, like I say, use that information against them. I think it will be different individual to individual. But that is definitely a tough situation, and I think a common one. I wish I had better information for you. And I think that was the only question I seen. Gordy Cox, how are you? If I don't see any other questions, I guess, Rio, I turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that works for me. All right. So, oh, okay. Sorry, I thought we had another question come through. All right, everybody. So I put the link in the chat to obtain your CEU, and I will be sure that this link goes out in tomorrow's follow-up email, as well as Dave's email address, so that way you can reach him if you have any more questions. So with that, I think that brings us to an end. Dave, thank you so much for being here today. Everybody, you will get a chance to hear Dave speak at the NAEMSE Symposium this year. So you don't want to miss out on that because he is an excellent presenter. And we greatly appreciate it. And we will see everybody next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.